So this leads us to cultural capital. Cultural capital refers to the widely shared high status cultural signals used for social and cultural inclusion or exclusion. And it's a lot more simple than that explanation sounds. So this is a widely recognized set of cultural symbols that everybody recognizes, whether they're part of the upper class or not. Behaviors, knowledge, values, possessions, preferences, and all these things are signs of somebody being in an upper class. Now, these are not always things you can see. These aren't always things you can measure, but we're all aware of them. I already discussed cultural capital in part in a previous class, and in that class I referred to it as high culture. Now, high culture refers specifically to culture itself. Remember, I talked about ballet and opera and classical music and all that. A more general term for this is cultural capital. So, somebody who is very formal, very well educated, a very refined manner of speaking, whether it's their vocabulary, to their tone of voice, to their verbal patterns in speech. Somebody with very, very refined manners when it comes to greeting people or the ability to carry on conversations and chit chat and kind of schmooze with other people. Impeccable table manners. And everything I'm describing, it's not just that somebody has these, it's that they do it with complete ease. Particular mannerisms, a particular mode of dress, having the right clothes, the right brand all the time. The ability to participate in certain sports and activities. Certain knowledge, so knowledge about fine wine and political affairs and current affairs and art and literature. Living in the right kind of neighborhood or going to the right kind of school. Taking the right kind of vacations. So you've seen this slide before in a previous class in reference to high culture. So cultural capital encompasses a certain set of social skills. It even could refer to language. All of these examples and a lot more create a certain kind of impression about a person. They act as a sign. They give people the right idea about you and what your position in society is. So, to provide an example that really does rely on stereotypes, so I realize this is a stereotype. Somebody who has a neck tattoo, who uses poor grammar, saying I seen or I ain't, who's totally into NASCAR and goes to the local bar scene to socialize, compared to somebody speaking in a grammatically correct manner, dressed in expensive clothes, who plays polo on the weekends, who attends political fundraisers. So cultural capital produces benefits for some people, but what that necessarily means is it also excludes others or doesn't provide benefits to somebody else. And language is a really interesting one for me. I think I've mentioned my mom was an English teacher in regards to cultural capital because it's something I've always picked up on, in part because of my mom and in part because of what I do for a living. So somebody, when it comes to language, who, excuse me, who has really immaculate grammar, conversational skills, they can talk with anybody, their language patterns, they can express themselves very, very well in an efficient and poignant and organized manner and do it quickly. You know what I mean? Some people just seem to have the ability to express themselves not just well and quickly, but I mean really well and quickly. Whereas other people will kind of fumble over their words or use the same words over and over, or they get stuck in their thoughts, they don't put their thoughts together as quickly. And maybe you have experience with this, that you know some people who have a natural ability to express themselves well, and others who do not. This is an example of cultural capital. Now, the technical term for this is linguistic codes. I'm not going to test you on what linguistic codes are, but I want you to be aware that that's what it's called. Linguistic codes is a concept that says that the way people talk varies according to their social class. And if you look at individual schools or the education system as a whole, it likes language that is abstract, more complicated, that's more varied in nature and less repetitive, more complex, of course, grammatically correct. Language that conveys more meaning is more desirable in an academic setting. Um, And this is not only more desirable, but it's rewarded more in an academic setting. So in other words, language that is more academic is more desirable in the education system specifically and in the world in general. On the other hand, language that tends to be commonly used by lower status families that usually have less education themselves, and they usually place less emphasis at home on grammar, on more complex grammatical patterns. They tend to use language that is less linguistically complicated. They tend to use a more limited range of vocabulary. That language is not as desirable in an educational setting. And you can argue that this is politically incorrect, and I totally agree with you, it's politically incorrect. You can argue that this perpetuates a stereotype, and I agree with that too. At the same time, it holds a certain degree of truth, and any teacher will tell you this. So, these lower income kids who are almost taught to speak in a certain way, in a manner that is not rewarded in the education system, go to school. And if they don't change the way they speak, it's almost like if they don't learn a different manner of speaking, if they don't learn new linguistic codes that match with the education system's more academic linguistic codes, then it's like they're penalized for it. It's almost like they have to learn a whole different way of speaking. Whereas students from higher income homes don't have that obstacle. They don't have that disadvantage. So in regards to both social and cultural capital, families of a higher socioeconomic status have more of both. And for both, these are largely inherited advantages. Whatever family you're born into has a socioeconomic status when you're born into it. And a child in that family will either benefit from that because it provides them certain advantages, or they won't. You'll either inherit cultural and social capital from your family of origin, or you won't. And if you don't, you will simply have less access to certain things in life, such as a good quality education, which is a key factor in the distribution of income. So let's just kind of bring this together so far. I like to do summaries midpoint just to kind of bring everything together. I talked about what social stratification is and how vague and relative these ideas of wealth and financial security are. They'll vary from person to person. In a way, they give you power, and with power comes a certain amount of control in your life. The fact is, wealthier people tend to live longer lives, and they tend to live healthier lives, both mentally and physically. Talked about income and income distribution, specifically how the income gap has widened. The rich have gotten richer, the poor have become poorer. I explained what a welfare state is. It's a term that's usually, I find, maybe it's just me, used in a negative way, but it simply means, the state looking after its people. Some people are for that. Some people think there should be more. Some people think there should be less. I discussed how education contributes to inequality, and this leads to human capital theory, which you personally must believe in, or you would not be taking this course and putting the time in and the money to upgrade your education. And finally, I talked about social and cultural capital.